Hey, it's Rachel. I have had several requests lately for some custom design work for Edible Gardens. If I ever quit my day job, I would be more than happy to do that. But right now, it's just not feasible. There's a lot more of you than there are of me. Instead, I'm going to do a quick video showing the basic principles that I use anytime I lay out a design, with the hope that you then can adapt that for your own purposes. I will also do a quick case study at the end, step by step, of how I would lay out a simple 4-foot by 8-foot garden and show how I apply these principles in practice. And because, as you can see, it is pouring rain right now, I am mostly going to film this indoors at my computer. Apologies if the audio is a little weird, but hopefully it's still useful. The first step in any garden design that I do is to place trellises and think about my vertical growing. One approach is to have the trellis at the back or shady side of your growing area and have the sun coming and covering the entire bed. You can see this from the way the shadows are being cast in this image. The logic here is you're maximizing the amount of light hitting your growing area and you're keeping the trellis back and out of the way. Now, alternatively, if you want to create microclimates and have part of your growing area with full sun and part of it with part shade to part sun, you can place the trellis down the middle or back a bit from either edge to play around with the amount of the microclimates you're creating, and that can be really helpful to get some variety in your design. And then last, if you happen to be growing quite a few crops that really benefit from shade, and I would say as an example here, if you had a bed of broccoli that you were growing and you wanted to prevent it bolting in the summer, putting a trellis on the sunny edge at the front here is a really great way to create that kind of microclimate. They'll have full light in the spring, and then as your trellis crops get planted in the summer and begin to flesh out and grow, they'll cast increasing amounts of shade right as the summer gets very, very hot. So that can be really helpful for slowing bolting. Arch trellises, one approach, and I've done it myself, is to put them across the pathway in between beds or growing areas. It makes really good use of that pathway space that would otherwise be kind of dead space, and it allows you to have full sunlight exposure on your entire growing area. Now, the downside of this approach, as I've mentioned in a prior video, is it can be hard to reach that part of your growing area. So depending on the width of the growing area and the bed, if you are blocking one long side of it with the trellis as shown here, that little zone right next to the trellis can be pretty hard to reach. Now, one approach is to instead drop the trellis on the short sides of your bed. So if the beds were rotated 90 degrees here, you would be able to fully reach everything from both long sides, and then you would only have the trellis blocking the short side. It does mean you get less trellis length, and so if you have a lot of vining crops that you want to grow, I have another approach that you could consider, which is to inset the trellis just a bit into the beds. And I would typically go, as an example, about 1 foot in on a 4-foot wide growing area. It means you can still reach from the outside, and it's only a 3-foot depth. That's usually reachable by most people. And then the inside foot is accessible from the walkway itself. And you get a fun little microclimate in there that could be handy depending on what you want to grow, because not everything needs full sun, as I will cover in a minute. On the right, last part here, I wanted to show what I do in my own garden. As my own beds have grown over time and I've scaled up the garden, I found the most efficient way to do this is to span the entire bed with one big line of trellis. I put all of my big summer vining crops over that, and then I can use that nice shady microclimate underneath and group together all of my shade-loving crops. It's a nice efficient use of the space, and it really helps to delay bolting. One question I get all the time is trellis orientation. Now, a north-south axis, if you run the long dimension of your trellis that way, you will have even light levels all day long. As the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, the full trellis gets the same amount of light. And that can be a good thing, but I will flag it is not the only way to do it. I personally run the long axis of my trellises east-west. And the reason is, most of what you grow in the summer on these trellises is happening in a time when the sun is really high in the sky, right? So during summer, the sun is quite high overhead. And even though technically the north side of my trellises are getting less light than the south side of my trellises, they are still getting plenty of light in the summer to grow pretty much anything I want. And the south side of the trellis is a particularly nice, hot, sunny microclimate, and that can come in handy with certain vegetables, which I will show in a second. Moving quickly just to the bed layouts, because there's a few patterns I'd like to follow, and I thought I would flag them for you guys here. It's a good way to think about organizing your beds or your growing area. So first is kind of the conventional or classic approach of a tall center and short edges. So if you were standing on the short edge of a bed and looking down it, this is what you would see. Running something like chard down the middle, which is a taller crop, flanking it with a row of onions on either side, and then flanking that with lettuce along the outer edges, would mean that the whole bed is getting sunlight and you can easily harvest things. So the shortest things are easy on the edges, and then as you reach in to get the taller things, you're not having to reach across a tall crop in order to harvest a short one. So a lot of people will organize things with this layout. One that I like to flag for people to think about is a layout that takes advantage of how these things grow over time. So if you put your slow growers down the middle, I've shown Brussels sprouts here, but it could also be carrots. They can sit tight in the middle, hang out, and slowly mature, and then you can plant things at the edges that you need to access much more often. Here I've shown arugula and spinach on one side, and then beans and lettuce on the other. Something like arugula, you could harvest that out and replace it with a whole second sowing and harvest a second time before something like a Brussels sprout would be finished growing. So it's a good use of the beds over time, and it allows you to get frequent harvests even if you have something that's sitting there for a long time and taking up quite a bit of space. And then last, there's one that I call sawtooth for shade. I do use this a lot, and I thought I would flag it because it doesn't always occur to people. This is an alternating pattern where you have short crop, tall crop, short crop, tall crop, and on and on. So here I've shown a row of chard and a row of carrots. Those will be my taller crops. I have arugula at one edge, spinach at the other edge, and lettuce down the middle. The reason I like this approach is that it's a combination of the light levels and the effect over time. So at the beginning of the spring, when all of this stuff gets planted, your chard and your carrots are quite short, and everything on the bed is getting full sun. But as the spring progresses into the summer, the chard and the carrots will grow taller, and they will start casting a little bit of shade beneath them. Not a lot, but a little. And it does help to delay the bolting of things like arugula, lettuce, and spinach that I've shown here. This is a layout that I know looks like a lot, but there's a reason I do it this way. It is a view of plants grouped by how much light they want. So from the left side of the page is partial shade, going into part shade to part sun to full sun, and then last all the way on the right is full sun that really wants some heat. So things like okra or peppers or sweet potatoes, they don't just need full sun, they need like a hot microclimate. And then the vertical axis here is the height of these plants in inches. And I've mapped a whole bunch of crops against this because this view of things allows me to start grouping them into families, and I think about my design according to these families. So first, let's think about and identify our shade lovers, because they're going to have to go into parts of the garden where I can cast shade. Head lettuces, leaf lettuces, bok choy, and arugula would all land in this category. Most of your leafy greens will. The other end of the spectrum, things like okra, tomatoes, zucchini, peppers, and sweet potatoes all need full sun. These are going to be your sun lovers. And I'll note quickly, this whole chart is your non-vining crops because vining crops are their whole own situation. So this is just non-vining crops for now. So when I say tomatoes, I mean determinate types, the ones that come about 3 to 4 feet tall. Your general athletes, shown here in green, are plants that can go kind of anywhere in the garden. And that's because they have a wide array of light levels they can handle, everything from part shade to full sun, and they're a wide variety of heights. So they can be tucked in a variety of different places. They're kind of agreeable. As you're doing your design, they can go in a lot of different spots. And then the next one that I do usually last in the design are the ones that I call the tuck-in crops. Things like spinach, radish, and beets. They have, again, a wide array of sunlight levels that they can tolerate, but they're also very short. And so anytime you have an extra little strip of space in the garden, you can kind of tuck them in there. For that reason, I usually put these in my designs last. One last view of all the different families all together on a page. And then I'll turn to the vining crops. Now, I did not show their heights because, candidly, they'll just climb whatever you put them on, so it wasn't really relevant. But I did want to show days to maturity to at least give you a sense of how long it takes for some of these things to grow. And then left to right is the same as the last page with different light levels. And the reason that I wanted to show it this way is because if you go back to the conversation I had before about the trellises and the east-west orientation, things like eggplant or squash or muskmelon would be great candidates for that south, really sunny side. And things like peas or pole beans, whether fresh or drying, would all do quite well with the part sun to full sun microclimate that you're creating on the north side of that trellis. And so that's why I grow mine in east-west orientation. It's because I do tend to grow a lot of vining crops, and they don't all need the exact same microclimate. Moving on to crops that need special consideration. This is a good thing to think through at the beginning of your garden design process. Just flag these, pay attention to them, and make sure that they're getting what they need. And in particular, I often end up grouping them together, as you'll see as I go through this. So first, anything that's prone to disease that needs a multi-year rotation. So things in the Solanaceae family, this would be potatoes, tomatoes, eggplant, or peppers. If I have a lot of these in a design that I'm working on, I tend to group them all together. And the reason is they should be grown on a 4-year rotation where there's 3 years off, where you're not growing anything in this family in that soil. It helps prevent a lot of diseases that can otherwise take these guys out. And if you scatter them all over your garden, it's really hard to keep track of where they've been and make sure that you're giving your soil the rest that it needs. If you pull them all together into one area, it's a lot easier to keep track of that. The other group that I think of, and it's kind of a judgmental name here, but are space hogs. These are things that will sprawl all over the bed and take up a bunch of space, and if you tried to grow other things around them, they would probably just be completely overwhelmed, candidly. So for that reason, I tend to grow these in their own beds to give them the space that they need. The exception that I've noted here is if you have a small fruited variety, so think like a sugar baby watermelon or a Kajari melon or a personal-sized pumpkin, those could go on a trellis and without killing it with just the mass of the fruit. But the bigger varieties of these, you're going to want to grow on the ground, and you're probably going to want to give them their own bed or their own area. My third category of special consideration is anything you have to dig up in order to harvest it. Might seem obvious, but it's just worth noting. Potatoes or sweet potatoes will not play well with others. Do not intermix them with other things unless it's something like, a quick crop of arugula that you can harvest out of there before these guys need to come out of the ground. Once they have to be dug up out of the ground, they're just going to kill everything as they get harvested. Now, I just want to note quickly, it's not every root crop. It's just these two. So things like beets, carrots, onions, and radishes, you can vertically just kind of carefully pull those up. They'll disrupt the soil a little bit as they come out, but for the most part, you can intermix those and interplant things around them. Last category is those that need cabbage moth protection. That's going to be your brassicas, things like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, or kale. Those need to be grown together, in my opinion, because you're going to want to grow them under row cover held up with hoops. And if you group them all together, you can just build this protection once. If you scatter them all over the garden, you again are going to have to keep track of where they are and do a lot more work in covering your crops. All right, let's bring this all together, make it more real, and show you guys a case study. So this is one I get a lot of, which is I've only got a small space. I'm primarily focused on fresh eating, and ideally I'd love to get my kids involved and get them excited about gardening. So this comes up a lot. So let's do a design for this person. I'm going to say they've got a single 4-foot by 8-foot raised bed. And because of their goals, I would say we're going to focus on crops that are high yielding in a small space, that grow quickly, and that ideally are something that would be expensive at the grocery store, so we're saving money. And for that, I would say herbs, salad greens, cherry tomatoes, snap peas, peppers, green beans, cucumbers, and radishes are all good choices. And then last, since we're trying to get kids involved and make it fun for them, I like to do the rainbow varieties of things like carrots and chard and beets. And then I've never met a kid that didn't enjoy growing and eating a watermelon. And so given the small space here, I'll suggest a sugar baby watermelon so it can be grown on a trellis. Now, if we go back to my categories before of how I think about all these plants and look at what we've got, there's really not very many shade lovers. It's just a small amount of shade-loving plants. I've got a good number of general athletes, but a lot of what's on this list is what I would call a sun-loving plant, and so I really want to maximize the amount of space on the bed getting full sun. For that reason, I'm showing this from above, I would put in a trellis and I would inset it 15 inches from the north, which for me is the shady edge of the bed. Gives you a little bit of shady space, but not too much. And then if you wanted to see a visual here of how I'm breaking this down and keep track of it as I put these vegetables in, that 15-inch space is divided into a 6-inch strip and a 9-inch strip. Then I've got a 6-inch planting area at the base of the trellis, then a 9-inch growing area, a 6-inch strip, and then at the south sunny side of the bed, I have a 12-inch strip running along that edge. So if we move to the trellis first, you have in an 8-foot span, you have plenty of room to put 3 crops on there. So I would use that 6-inch strip to put a cucumber, a sugar baby watermelon, and a cherry tomato. Each of those requires 2 feet of space on the trellis. Because the watermelon takes the longest of these things in order to mature, I've put it in the middle, kind of out of the way. And then the cucumber and the cherry tomato, you're going to want to be picking all the time, so I put those at the edges for easy access. And that leaves 1-foot spaces open in between those 3 plants. So moving to the next step here, I would use that 1 foot wide strip to plant 2 peas, and then the other 1 foot wide strip gets 2 pole beans. They need to be spaced 6 inches apart. There's plenty of room in there for them to grow up and to fill out the rest of this trellis. If we go to the shady side of the trellis for a second, that 15-inch strip, I would use 6 inches of it for arugula and lettuce, so a half row of each. And then in that 9-inch strip, one of my favorite things to do, especially in the spring, is to plant every 6 inches, you plant a seed and you alternate. 1 spinach, 1 chard, 1 spinach, 1 chard. And here I'm recommending a rainbow chard because it's fun for kids. The reason I recommend this is that as the summer progresses and your arugula and your lettuce bolt and get taken out and your spinach bolts and gets taken out, you're left with chard plants that are spaced every 12 inches. And then they've got about 15 inches to spread out here in that shady side. They'll do just fine in the part sun, and they will not bolt because chard is a biennial. It flowers its second year. And they will just stay there and keep growing and giving you salad greens all through the summer, long after the arugula and the lettuce have bolted and disappeared with the spinach. Going back to the sunny side, we had wanted to put in some carrots, again, mostly for the kids probably, but so if we do a strip of rainbow carrots, they're going to take a long time to mature. So I would put them along the base of the trellis in a 9-inch wide strip, and they're out of the way, slowly growing. They're not going to cast too much shade. Their foliage is really lacy, and even if it did start casting shade to the north of it, that's where we have the trellis crops, and they're going to quickly grow taller than the carrots anyway, so it's really not a concern. Then at the sunny edge of the bed, that bottom foot, is where I would put my sun lovers, like the peppers, and then the cilantro, basil, and parsley are sun lovers, and you need to access them and harvest them really often. So tucking them along the south edge of the bed is a really good place for them. You've then got a couple of bush beans tucked in here. I do like to work bush beans in. One, they're really, really productive. You pick them all the time. There's a good crop, especially for kids to kind of enjoy and grow. They also, if you cut off the plant at the soil at the end of the year and let the roots decompose in the ground, they will break down and put some nitrogen back in the soil. The peas and the beans on the trellis will do the same. Again, you have to leave the roots in the soil to decompose. But if you do that, it helps to rebalance the nitrogen. This particular bed had some heavy feeders in it, like cucumber and watermelon and peppers. It's a nice thing to do to rebalance that nitrogen level if you can get some legumes in your mix. And then everything along the south edge here is a 12-inch by 12-inch spacing. That leaves us with this little 6-inch strip at the end. And as mentioned before, that's a great spot for tuck-in crops. And so that's where I would put my radishes and a strip of rainbow beets. By the time the peppers, bush beans, and the herbs are starting to size up and grow, your radishes are very, very fast maturing crops. They'll already be picked and gone. The rainbow beets will take a while to mature, but that's okay. They can just hang out there behind the herbs and the pepper. You can pick those herbs on a regular basis. And then as those beets eventually start to mature, you can reach in and pull them out. They will do just fine as the carrots size up and start to give them a little bit of partial shade. That is it. I hope that was helpful and that you can use this as you lay out your own gardens. If there are any questions or main subjects that I didn't cover, please flag in the questions below and I will do my best to answer them. Until next time, thanks.